Hello, everyone, and welcome back. This is our second lecture, and our officially our third lecture from May 19th. I know this is a lot on the first day, but you're going to need all this to help you through the final 5 weeks of this course. So in this lecture, I'm going to be talking about your semester-long research project, which is going to be first a research proposal, followed by a full manuscript that you turn in that has also a results and discussion section. So here I'm going to cover the components of your research proposal. Uh, we're going to talk about what operational and conceptual definitions are. And then I'm going to show you some early literature on social class and ethical behavior. And we're also going to get some practice in lab generating some operational and conceptual definitions. Another thing that you might want to look at, let me get there, is our rubric for the research proposal. It has a whole section on how to write one with details about what needs to be included in it, all the sections that you're going to need to have. And we're going to slowly work through this throughout the semester. And it even has a rubric involved that you can use. There is also, for your final paper, we're mainly going to be talking about the proposal today. But just know that the final paper also has a rubric, and it has in it all the sections that you need to have. You'll notice that these sections are really the same as the proposal, all the way up into the results and discussion section. For some reason, I don't have the rubric with this one. Maybe it's associated with something else, but we'll get there when we get there. Okay. All right. So let's go over the components of what's going to go into this research proposal. Okay. So first things first, is this a team project? It kind of is a team project. You are going to be assigned teams in our very first lab on Tuesday, May 20th. And you're going to be working with that group for the whole term. You're going to be designing with that group a field study. Now, usually I let students design an experiment or a field study. But we won't have access to the Sonapool this summer, so you're going to be designing a study where you actually go out into the wild and you observe people and collect data. And you're going to come up with your own operationalizations of your independent variables and dependent variables. Your independent variables being social class, and your dependent variables being ethical behavior. So what is that going to be to you? You're going to come up with your own research hypotheses, which is going to be based on literature reviews that you do. And then you're going to submit a proposal. I'll grade that proposal, and then you go carry out the studies. You actually conduct the studies, you analyze your data, and then you write up a final research report at the end of the semester. So depending on what happens on Tuesday, you're either going to pick your own groups or I'm going to assign you groups, and then I will post a file on D2L that reminds you of your group assignments. I'm going to remind you that when we get into these groups, it's probably good to get each other's contact information. maybe you create a group me or a WhatsApp where you can talk with each other, and you can set up times to meet outside of class. But most of the time, you're going to have enough time in class to engage with the topics that day and finish up your assignments. Whoops. Okay. Again, all these guidelines are available on D2L. Your proposal is going to be due on June 3rd at midnight. We're going to have multiple labs to discuss your research projects, but best to get the ball rolling now on Tuesday, May 20th, when you come to class. We want to get as much done as we can early to save us some time. Your final paper is going to be due on June 18th. I know that our class goes from Monday to Thursday, and June 18th is a Wednesday. So you might be wondering to yourself, why are we ending a day early? That's because Thursday, the 19th, is a national holiday. That's Juneteenth, and we're not going to be meeting for class that day. So we're actually going to be wrapped up with this class a day early. And again, your topic of study in this class is going to be on social class and ethical behavior. So social class representing our relative social rank in the world. And it's a subjective variable. So this could be based on things like your education, your income, your resources that you have access to. Ethical behavior can be a lot of different things. That's really up to you to define. But it could be something like doing something nice for somebody, pro-social behavior. It could be an act of discrimination. That's an unethical behavior. Maybe we want to try to avoid that. So it's really up to you to define that. And there's a lot of area that you have to cover. Social psychology is a really big field. What's required in your proposal? You're going to have an introduction section. That introduction section should tell us why we should care about this project. It will cover the significance of your project and your study aim. So your job is to hook the reader with an interesting story, or maybe discuss social problems out there in the world. Maybe there's a personal example that you can latch onto. Maybe there's some statistics that you could latch onto, like maybe there's inequality in the world or in the United States that you want to talk about, and you can provide us with statistics. And then you want to describe your study aims at a conceptual level. This is like a conceptual hypothesis or a conceptual research question. So here, we're studying social class and compassion in a field study. Tell us why your aims are significant. Again, I think it's best to lead with dollars and lives here. That's what gets people caring. So this study has potential to inform about reducing inequality. Why should we care? Well, inequality contributes to, debt uh, and other unpleasant things that we don't want in society. The next thing that you're going to do after that opening paragraph is do a literature review on the topic to date. You're going to include empirical studies. And there's an entire lab on this where you learn how to review an article and tell us in a few sentences what they did, what they found, and how these findings relate to your study aim. You're going to take a position here. Who do you think is going to be more ethical? Higher social class or lower social class? In this assignment, you're actually going to, the lab assignment, you're going to do one article review, and you're welcome to share with your peers your article review in your group so that you can cut down on the work. Ultimately, you're going to have a minimum of 6 papers that you cite in this manuscript that you're writing. Then you're going to write a present study section. This is where you lay out your research hypotheses. It could also be framed as research questions if you don't find a lot of evidence supporting your claims. So your hypothesis has to be testable. As an example of this, one group in the past studied if people shopping at higher end stores versus lower end stores return their shopping carts to the shopping cart return. So social class here was measured with the type of store that they were shopping at, and the ethical behavior is whether or not they returned their shopping carts. And here was a hypothesis that they put forward. Let you read over that. I will post under the assignment some example A papers from prior semesters. Just know that these example A papers are from when I worked at a different university and we had to do two studies. Here you only have to do one study. So they end up doing way more work than you all did. So just be aware of that. It's just to show you like the kind of quality that we expect. What's required in your method section? You need to tell me about your participants. Who will you study? What's your rationale for using these folks? So some classes in the past have been able to use our SONA pool, and you might say something like, I'm going to study people shopping at the Walmart, or I'm going to study people at the crosswalk over there on Tyler that's right by the Moe's and the subway. So be very specific about who you're going to be looking at and how you're going to be entering the data into this study. Tell us about your study design and materials. What are your variables? Are these variables between subjects or within? Are they measured, manipulated? Tell us all the details about how they're measured or manipulated. And give us a rationale for how this measure will tell you about the construct under study. Don't just say I'm using this measure. Tell us why it's a good measure. So this project is a group effort, but your writing is going to be done on your own. Your writing's going to be done on your own. The group effort is going to be the discussions that you have with your peers in your group during class, and much of the work will be done again on your own. Although your studies, your papers, and assignments that you turn in this class should be relatively similar to each other, just not copy paste jobs. So let's go ahead and review the literature on social class. What you're going to see in D2L, it's not posted yet. But under content, I'm going to have a section here near helpful resources, maybe just below it, where there are a series of papers that I've uploaded for you that are on the topic. But what I'm going to be covering right now is this PIF paper. It's a really short one and a pretty good read. So go ahead and take a look at that before you come to lab on Tuesday. Okay. So some concepts that we're going to reinforce are research hypotheses. Explain how you're expecting the relationship between two variables to play out in terms that are observable. It has to be testable. And then these are concepts that you've learned in Psych 302, and they'll be reinforced here of conceptual definitions and operational definitions. So conceptual definitions refer to how a layperson would describe a construct. Okay, so what does this construct mean in lay terms? And an operational definition is exactly how you measure it. How do you reify that construct? How do you give a person a score on that construct that gives it some kind of meaning. And the paper that we're going to be reviewing in the lecture today is from Paul Piff. First, I want to talk about two naturalistic field studies that were done. This is probably going to be the most helpful for you because you're going to have to do a field study in this class. So let's look at study one. They had a conceptual definition that vehicles are reliable indicators of people's social rank. Okay, so the make, age, appearance are all part of that conceptual definition. And they had people observing vehicles out in the real world, research assistants in the lab, and ranking them on a scale from 1 to 5 on their social class. So how much wealth did this person have? Observers in this study, these were research assistants, stood near an intersection and coded the status of a vehicle as it approached on this 1 to 5 scale. And then they recorded whether the driver cut off other vehicles. Oh my gosh, look at this intersection. I don't think people would really know what to do. So here they're coding ethical behavior. They're saying unethical behavior is cutting somebody off. Okay, not following the rules of the road. Hey, that's illegal. Okay. So again, social class was conceptualized as the quality of a person's car. Whoops. And it was operationalized on a 1 through 5 scale. This is how people's scores were actually coded. Okay. Ethical behavior was really the opposite of it. It was breaking the law. You're not allowed to cut people off at an intersection. And it was operationalized as either cutting people off or not cutting people off. Okay, so here we've got our conceptual and operational definitions of both variables in the study. And one thing you're going to be asked to do on Tuesday with your group is to think about how you're going to conceptualize and operationalize your variables. Study two worked kind of the same way. They again said vehicles are reliable indicators of people's wealth, and they had folks measuring on that 1 through 5 scale the quality of the vehicle. And here in this study, the observer positioned themselves at a marked crosswalk, and they coded the status of the vehicle and recorded whether the driver cut off a pedestrian. Now, the rule is once somebody's in that crosswalk or standing in front of that crosswalk, you're supposed to stop. I get so worried whenever I'm crossing Tyler on foot right by campus because there's so many cars that are parked on the street that people who are driving, like they can't actually see you. And the median does not help either because there's trees and stuff in it, not really designed in such a way for pedestrian safety. So if you do decide to do a study like that, I'm going to say, so that I don't get fired and so that you all don't get hurt. More importantly, that you all don't get hurt. Don't do a crosswalk study on Tyler. So again, how was ethical behavior conceptualized? We know that social class was conceptualized and operationalized in the exact same way as study one. So that's not something that we need to rehash. But here, again, this is conceptualized as illegal driving behavior. This is our dependent variable. And it was operationalized as either doing it or not. Okay, so do they let the pedestrian cross or do they not let them cross? And some really interesting results played out in this study. You can see on the x-axis, it has the codes of the cars. And then on the y-axis, it has the percent of people who cut off either the other cars in study one, that's up here in panel A, or in panel B, that's the people who cut off the pedestrians. So be thinking about this as you are developing your hypotheses and your operational and conceptual definitions. You can see here that the higher the quality of the car or the higher social class, the more they cut off other people. Okay. Now, this part is not going to be quite as relevant for you because you're not going to be able to develop an experiment that you conduct in an online study. You might still be able to make your study an experiment, but I'll leave that up to you to decide. So in study 4, we're going to skip study 3. Sorry about that. They asked, how can we experimentally manipulate social class? One way to do that might be just giving people a whole bunch of money, but we don't have enough money to do that. And you're not going to just be able to give people money on in a field study. So they said, we're going to have people look at this ladder. And on this ladder, it represents people's social class, where the people at the top represent those with the most money, most education, most respected jobs. And the people at the bottom represent those with the least money, least education, the least respected jobs. And participants were asked to either compare themselves to those at the top, which relatively should move them down the ladder. So if I compare myself to the richest person in the world, Elon Musk, that's going to make me feel like I am a lower social class. The other half of participants compared themselves to those at the lowest rung. So this might be a person experiencing homelessness or something like that. Whoever comes to mind for the participant. And they said that relatively speaking, this would actually push you up the ladder and make you relatively higher social class. Okay, so here the independent variable is being conceptualized as subjective rankings of people's money, wealth, and education and their job. And it's being operationalized as either imagining oneself in the lower or upper class, okay, through this relative standing manipulation. Okay, so you're either in one group or you're in the other group. That's how it was operationalized. There were some manipulation checks in this study. They wanted to see if it actually worked. People who compared themselves to lower class, or in other words, the upper class group, had a higher mean than those who compared themselves to the upper class, or in other words, the lower class group. And they were significantly different. Okay. You're probably seeing a bunch of numbers in front of you right now and going, oh gosh, are we going to have to do stuff like that? Yes, you are. The dependent variable in the study this was done in person, and they measured how many candies participants took out of a jar after they were experimentally manipulated to be in one of these two groups. And they were told that these candies were for a study on developmental psychology for children, and they could take some if they wanted. And then the amount of candy taken was the dependent variable. So here, this was unethical behavior was conceptualized as quite literally stealing candy from children. And they put the same number of candies in the jar each time so that when they were left over with the jar afterward, they would know exactly how much the person took. So this was the number of candies operationalized as the number of candies taken from children. And they found here that those who were put into the higher class condition ended up taking more candy than the folks who were in the lower class condition. Fun stuff. Okay, so these are just some things for you all to think about as you're moving through your hypotheses. Again, I'm going to load up a whole bunch of readings for you, and your hypotheses are going to take shape as the weeks wear on. Okay, I'll see you all on Tuesday. And this lecture is associated with quiz number 2, which is due on May 19th at midnight.